I am Mr. Skinner. I am not your buddy. I am your teacher. I am not your best friend. That doesn't work out well. Teachers and students are not supposed to be best friends. You can do that elsewhere. And you're going to work from bell to bell in here every single day. There will be no free days. You will not go to the band room. You will not go anywhere else. I don't care how much you beg, you're not leaving. You're going to work nonstop every day. No phones, period, until the last 5 minutes when you can take a photograph of the homework. No texting, no none of that. We're not doing it. If you choose to use your phone before the last 5 minutes, then you choose to lose it. It goes with me. Then it goes downstairs, you get it back the next day. No exceptions. There are no special people. There are no emergencies. Once you're in this class, you stay. The world ends until this class is over. Assigned seats. We've already been through this. This is where you're going to sit until I have to move you. Bring your own paper and pencils. I'm not giving you anything. I'm not giving you paper, notebook paper, and I'm not giving you pencils. If you don't bring it, borrow it from someone else. If they won't give it to you, you have nothing to use for the whole class, and you've missed everything. When you enter the room, stop here to get some paper. That's the bucket in the back of the room. You will use these to write your answers and deliver them to my desk. You're only writing the answer and your last name until I can figure out everybody's names, most of which I know, but some there may not be. No textbooks. There are all new standards this year. The OGT is gone, so those textbooks are of no use to anybody. 3-ring binder. Everybody must have a 3-ring binder, and in it you will include everything. It will be work from practice problems, homework, tests, quizzes, after-test assignments, everything. It's worth 1,000 points and is checked one time each 9 weeks. If you have it, good. If you don't, it doesn't count. In the past, I've given some partial points for just having a notebook and a few pieces of paper. You get nothing if it is not right. Tests. You only get one time to take a test. You do not get multiple times. There are no do-overs, so you must study. If you need help, you come to intervention. If you don't, watch it on the internet. Everything is going to be recorded this year and put on YouTube by 2 p.m. so you can watch it on your phone, iPad, or desktop computer. If you choose not to get help, you're choosing not to pass. If you miss a test or a quiz because you are absent, then you will take it during 6th period. You're going to stay up to date with what's going on in here 2nd period. You must give a 1-day notice when you're ready to take it. You can take only one per day, and that pertains to those who have issues with coming to school, where they miss more than one test. I am not interested in personal conversations. We're not doing anything else but math in here. There are others who let you do that stuff, but I don't. We're not going to do that in here. It is time to begin. Warm-up quiz. Answer the problem. Bring your answer to the desk up here. Don't place it on the desk. You're just going to walk by with it, and I'm going to write down whether you had it or not. If I say your last name, that means you had it. If I say no, that means you did not. We'll do 5 of these each day. The first day is always the slowest. Here we go. Make sure you put the number largely. The number, if it's 24, don't write it like this. I'm just going to pass you on because I'm not going to squint to read it. Write it largely with your last name at the bottom. If it's any of this stuff and I can't see it, I'm just going to wave you through. There's the first one. Bring it to me when you think you have the answer. Go to the front. The answer should have been -6. That would have come out to be 6 minus 12, which is a -6. Next one. On this one, x is -1 and y is 2. So that's -1 minus 6, which should be a -7. Try this one. X is 3. And y is 5. So you have 3 times 3 is 9 minus 10 is going to be a -1. Try this one. All right. X is -1 and y is -2. For this part here, you have to dump in -1 for the x, where the parentheses are at. And then you have to dump in -2 for the y, where the parentheses are at. This minus sign was already in the problem. So if I dump in a -1 there, I have a double negative. So that comes out to be 1. Double negative plus 2. It should be 3 for your answer. Last one. Bring this one up. -2 times 4 plus 5 times 3. -2 times 4 is -8, and then add 15 to that to get 7. Pick a number from 1 to 5 and write your last name on it at the bottom. Everything must be big. The winning number is 5. Today's objective. N.CN.1. These are completely new starting this year. Nothing is the same as last, but some of the topics are still the same. You do not have to write all this down. This will be on video, so if you need to write this down, you can go do it later by watching the first part of the video. Know there is a complex number I such that I squared equals -1. And every complex number has the form a plus bi, with a and b real numbers. You do not have to write this down since it's going to be on the video. Your knowledge targets you should be able to do after we finish this. Define I as square root of -1. Or define complex numbers. Write complex numbers in the form a plus bi, with a and b being real numbers. Again, you don't have to write that down. I'm going to be posting these on the wall, and they're on the video. Here's an example. You must know that I is an imaginary number and it equals -1. If you do not get that part of it, then we're going to have trouble. So start with I equals -1. I is -1. Very good. And on that slide, I did not put in the square root sign, which is what threw everybody off. So there it is. Now we need to find I squared. So if I is the square root of -1, the square root of -1 times the square root of -1 is going to give me what? If I multiply the square root of -1 by itself, what would I get? It's not going to be 1. Getting close.
Did you say I squared?
I squared, yes. I squared is I times I. If you break it up, so you have the square root of -1 times the square root of -1. It's no different than this. If I multiplied the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, what do I get back? I would just get 3. It's no different than this. What if I had the square root of 4 times the square root of 4? It's a perfect square, so what's the square root of 4? 2. So 2 times 2 is what? 4. So notice how it works out. When you multiply two square roots together that are the same, you get that number underneath of it. So what would the square root of -1 times the square root of -1 be? -1, right. So we're going to build on these. Remember from the last slide, we had I equals the square root of -1. So now build on this. From the last slide, we had I equals the square root of -1. Now you have I squared is equal to -1. Once you know that, you don't have to go back and work them out again. You're just building the list as we go on. All right, now we have I to the third. We've already done I squared. Now we need to do I to the third. What was I squared? -1. So if I want to break apart I to the third, I can do it like this and have 3 i's multiplied together. That's I to the third. Or I can do this. I can break it up as something that I already know. We did I squared. Is I squared times I still I to the third? Yes. What is I squared? Negative 1, right. But I is the square root of negative 1, and we don't write the square root of negative 1. It's an imaginary number. So when you have negative 1 times I, you end up with a negative I. So keep that in your list. I to the third is negative I. So we've done I squared, and I to the third. Let's take a look at I to the fourth. I to the fourth can be broken up as I times I times I times I. But we already know I squared, and I to the third. You can break this up several different ways, but if you break it up as I squared times I squared, what is I squared from what we did before? Negative 1. So put negative 1 and negative 1. What's negative 1 times negative 1? Positive 1, right. So we've done I to the fourth. You could have also come up with this. You could have done I to the third times I. Of course, we know I to the third is negative I from the last time, but when you multiply it by I, you'd get negative I squared, which means you'd have a negative 1. It's still 1. So either way you went about it, you could still get this. All right, keep that in mind. Here is I to the fifth. Again, you can break this up as 5 i's, but that's not going to do you much good. What can I use from what we've done before to break up I to the fifth? So I to the what? I to the third and I to the second? Okay, we'll try that. And those add up to be 5. What is I to the third from what we did before? I to the third was a negative I, yes. It was a negative I. And I squared was what? It was a negative 1, right. So what's a negative I times a negative 1? Positive I, right. And that's it. So you end up with just I for I to the fifth. Once you work these out like this, you don't have to go back and work them out again. It's like knowing 5 times 6. It'll be 30. You don't have to work it out. All right, practice. Here's 10 points. For the practice problems, you have to put only the answer and your last name on it. Drop it off up here with the paper facing me. Do not show any work on the paper you turn in up here. Show work on notebook paper that stays in your 3-ring binder. See if you can break up I to the sixth, just like we did the other ones, and bring it up and drop it off. All right, on I to the sixth, here's what you can do. Several different ways. The one way you shouldn't use is just writing 6 i's. That can be a bit much. How about we break it up as I to the fourth and I to the second? 4 and 2 is 6. What is I to the fourth? 1. And what is I squared? Negative 1. What's 1 times negative 1? Negative 1. Remember, I to the fourth is 1. I squared is going to be negative 1. So you should come up with an answer of negative 1. You could have also done this. You could have done I to the third, I to the third. Each one is a negative I, which when you multiply them together, you come up with a positive I squared. And I squared is what? Negative 1. I squared is negative 1. What's I to the third? Negative I. What's I to the fourth?
1.
What's I to the fifth?
I.
Right. What is I?
Square root of negative 1.
Square root of negative 1. It's from that slide where I left off the square root sign. Here's another practice problem. Simplify I to the 8th. I to the 8th. How should I break up I to the 8th? Just give me 2 numbers that I can break up 8 as.
I to the 4th and I to the 4th.
Yeah, I to the 4th and I to the 4th. What is I to the 4th? 1. 1 times 1 is 1. If you have that, come on up here and show me your paper.
Yes.
In addition to the 4 and the 4, you could have also done I to the 5th, I to the 3rd, or you could have done I squared 4 times. It's a bit much, but each one of them is going to be 1. Here is a mid-class quiz. 5 points each. Usually I have 3 of them. We may do 1, we may do 2, sometimes none. I to the 10th. See if you can break that up and walk by with the answer. I to the 10th. Some of you might be thinking I to the 5th and I to the 5th, which is possible. It's not the easiest. You could also do I squared 5 times, but it's easy to understand, but it's kind of long to write out, so it takes a lot of time. We know that I to the 4th is what? 1. So what if we had 2 I to the 4ths and an I to the 2nd? You could do that. Or what is I to the 8th? 1. So I to the 8th and I to the 2nd, that adds up to 10. I to the 8th is 1, and I to the 2nd is what? So you multiply those together and you come up with -1. In this next example, you're going to look at these patterns that are going to make it easy for you to get the right answer quickly, like Lewis does. Lewis knows the patterns. We did this last year in, I forgot what class that was, integrated. And she knows the pattern, so she can do it like that. And Deerfield knows it too. You're going to remember it, don't you? You're going to remember it, and he's going to get it. He was really quick like she was last year. Pattern. I to the 4th is what? 1. I to the 8th is what? What is I to the 12th? 1. Why is that?
Does it follow the pattern of 1 by 4?
Yes, it goes up by 4. So if your exponent on the I is a multiple of 4, then it's automatically a 1. So save yourself the time. I to the 16th is what? 1. So exponents that are multiples of 4 will always give an answer of 1. So you don't even have to do any work on those. That's how they can get them so quick. What is I? Square root of -1. Yes, we've remembered that in spite of my fouling up the very first screen of the year and not putting a square root sign on it. I to the 3rd, what is that? -I. What is I to the 5th? I. We did that one. So what's I to the 7th? -I, and we'll double check it. I to the 4th, I to the 3rd. I to the 4th is 1, and I to the 3rd is a -I. So 1 times I is -I. So yes. What is I to the 9th? I. Why is that?
They're flipping every other one.
That's right. The pattern is you're starting off excluding the first I, which is the square root of -1. You go to I to the 3rd and you come up with a -I. I to the 5th is +I. I to the 7th is -I. I to the 9th is I. After the exponent of 1, so like I to the 1st is just square root of -1. All odd exponents will give you alternating answers of -I and I. So if you have an odd exponent, it's either going to be -I or +I. And if it's a low enough number, you can figure out what it's going to be. And you can also use this as multiples to your advantage. If I gave you I to the 15th, you could think about that and come up with the right answer really quick. But even quicker, know that it's a multiple of 5. What was I to the 5th? So 3 i's multiplied together is what? I to the... Now we're getting ahead of ourselves here. I have to skip down to the bottom. I to the fifth is just what? I. So 3 i's multiplied together is I to the what? What's I to the third? Negative I. So you could do it that way as well. Here's another example. I squared is what? Negative 1. I to the sixth is what? I to the 10th. Negative 1. I to the 14th. I to the 18th. Yes. If you start with the exponent of 2 and add 4 each time, like 2, 6, 10, 14, 18, 22, 26, 30, the result will be a negative 1 for the answer each time. So, if you look at all of the even numbers that are not multiples of 4, they're going to come out to be an answer of negative 1. I to the 26th. Try that one and get an answer. On the practice problem, it's a 26. Is 26 a multiple of 4? No. So remember the pattern we just looked at a few minutes ago. 2, 6, 10, 14, 18, 22, 26. What do all of those give you? A negative 1, yes. For those that are finished, can you tell me what I to the 40th would be? What is special about I to the 40th? It's a multiple of 4, and all multiples of 4 are what? 1, yes. Now is the time that you can get out a phone and you can take a picture of what's going to come up on the screen. Remember this. Homework is graded based on effort. There. Here's the problem number. Here's the problem. This represents all of the work necessary to get the answer. Box the answer. If you do this for all 10 problems, then you get your 50 points. But if this is necessary to get the answer and you're turning in this stuff here, you don't get any points. I'm sure you all remember this. So do not turn in a list of answers or just a couple of steps of work. I'm not giving you credit for it. This is today's homework. Simplify all of these. And you'll notice in some cases that you have 2 i's that you have to multiply together and then simplify after that. However you have to do it, show all of the steps necessary to simplify that.